Mark Walker, and I work in the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. And I'm going to talk about web scraping with Google Sheets. So what is web scraping? It's something like you've been doing all along. So scraping is basically um, taking data that's on the web and taking it off online, and whether it's putting it into a spreadsheet of a Word document, sort of like copy and paste. So if you've ever gone to a website and you've copied and pasted a chart into a Word document or tried to paste a chart into an Excel spreadsheet, you've basically been making attempts to scrape that data. One of the issues that we run into sometimes is we encounter websites where is clearly a chart or clearly a spreadsheet on that website. But when we try and copy it and paste it in the spreadsheet because we want to do some analysis or look through it, it won't paste into Google Sheets or Excel correctly. So we end up spending a lot of time deleting cells and cleaning up that data. And that can take, in some cases, hours and days, depending how much time you have. So there's two types of scraping. One is crawlers, and that basically is when you have a scraper on a website. And basically what that scraper does is it goes through and detects any new items or additions to a website, and every time it detects that, it will send you a note. An example, I have scrapers on FOIA reading rooms for the federal government. So sometimes instead of filling a FOIA request for me, they will just post it online for everyone. And so I have it set up to where if that's the case and I know something's coming, I'll get a ping every time an agency, like the Department of Commerce, I have one for them. Every time they post a new item in their FOIA reading room, it will scrape that site and send me an alert and tell me that something new's there. Extractor is kind of what we're going to be talking about today, where we're just taking information that's just on one page, one sheet of a website, and we're uploading it into a spreadsheet. So to do this, you have to have just a small, just basic understanding of HTML. So HTML is sort of the programming language particularly used to design web pages in web browsers. And that's, for the most part, you just need to understand that that's the code. When you're looking to do this, you're looking at an HTML code. It's basically what's behind every single web page and website. So I took a screenshot of sort of a chart that I was looking at this morning. And this is what's on the right-hand side is the HTML. So it's basically a breakdown of every single thing that exists on this web page. And this is what this looks like. So HTML contents are usually wrapped in tags. So the content, it'll be sort of like two alligator mouths. I guess that's a good way to use it. And those two things will be illustrated between those. So we'll see, I have an example at the bottom, table. If there's a table or a list or a chart on a website, if you look at that HTML, it will show you like, hey, this is a table and this is the name for it. And I have an HTML dictionary here in case you guys want to review that. But we just go back and just look at this sheet, we'll see, right, so I have highlighted in blue. You'll see table class, and then you'll see sort of a description of what's coming after this. This is basically what's highlighted. It's what's on the left-hand side. And if you hover over that, if we were hovering over that, what your Google Chrome browser would do would automatically highlight that table or chart to show you like, this is this particular one that you're looking at on this page. So we're going to talk about import HTML. We're going to talk about a function that Google Sheets has. A lot of web scraping and things, when you hear about web scraping, a lot of people use Python as a tool. It's a coding language which is pretty much separate from anything you normally do through like the course of your work. But Google Sheets has found a way to take basically some of the same impact that Python has. Maybe not as a deep of a dive for certain things, but basically they're able to like scrape websites pretty effortlessly with a simple formula. This formula only works in Google Sheets. It doesn't work in Excel. So if you primarily work in Excel, if you want to bring in a table or a chart, you're going to have to first do it in Google Sheets and then maybe save it as an Excel file. So we're going to break down the formula. The formula requires three things: the URL, and you're going to put this URL in quotes. Whatever the web page that you're trying to scrape, the formula wants you to paste that URL into the formula and put it in quotes. Next, it wants you to query. The same way we were looking at that HTML, you would open up, and I'll show you guys, you'll open up sort of the source code for a web page, and you would hover over a list or a table on the site, and that HTML will tell you whether it's listed as a table, a list, or a chart. And then you would take the name of that and you would write it into the formula. You would write list or table in quotation marks. Index. Index starts at 0 instead of 1. I don't know why Google Sheets made it start at 0, but that's where they have it starting. And that basically means the first chart, list, or table on a page. So you may have run into instances where a web page has 4 charts or 4 tables on the page. So you want to be able to tell Google Sheets which one you want to bring in. And by having the index entered, it will tell you. So this is sort of this is the job listing site from IRE's website. So I scraped this just to bring it into a Google spreadsheet. So the first thing I did was right click. If you're using Google Chrome, when you right click, you will see where it says inspect. You'll click inspect, and that will immediately open up what you saw on one of the previous slides, that HTML code for the page. And it will look just like this. So I will look at the HTML code, and it will tell me that there's a header. H3 would be the header, and it is titled job listings. I go down and I see that there's a table listed, and I would hover over that table, and I'll do this live so you guys can see it. I'll hover over that particular piece of code, and it will highlight the table on the left-hand side. So that's what I know, that's what I'm scraping. So I would put in my formula that it's a table. So we know that it exists in the HTML, we can see it, and we know that it's a table. And that's me sort of highlighted that, and you can see that once you highlight it, it's sort of like Google Sheets is really intuitive to where it tries to help you out as much as possible. So you can double check just by sort of hovering over it to make sure you're trying to scrape the right thing. So you'll go into your Google Sheet, you will type in equals import HTML. And this is what Google Sheets will give you, sort of just a hint that, hey, make sure before you enter this, these are all the things you need ahead of time. So I would type in import HTML. I would give out the web query, which would be ire.org/jobs. I saw that it was a table, so I would put in quotation marks that it's a table. And because there's only one one table on that web page, I'm just going to write 0 to tell it to take the first thing that it sees. And it imported that right into Google Sheets, and it looks just like this. A COVID example that I recently, for a story I'm working on at the Times, I wanted to sort of look at the Indian Health Service. And I want to see the Indian Health Service positive to negative test ratios. I tried to copy this table into Google spreadsheets by just doing the copy and paste method, but it kept coming up really wonky. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna have to scrape this really quick. So I just did the same thing. I like looked at this, is like, okay, this clearly looks like a table. And I took the web page, import HTML, IHS/coronavirus, put it in as a table, the number 0 since it was the only chart, and immediately brought that into Google Sheet. So I saved that my time of cleaning this up had I just tried to copy and paste it in here. And I can immediately jump into this spreadsheet and do the calculations that I'm looking for this piece. There are a few other formulas. Import XML, import range, import feed, and import data. Like if you ever wanted to import a CSV file you see on a website, you can scrape that CSV file straight from the website and bring it into Google Sheets. The same with a feed, and the same with anything that's XML. And we can get into that at another time. Before I go to the live, sort of show you guys how to do it live. Does anybody have any questions? You can put them in the chat or.
Yeah, we have one question. Go ahead, Emily.
I just was wondering, like I encounter a lot of, you're on your website and there's data on it that you want, but it's listed as like a PDF or something. So it's not easy to sort. Does the scraping, can you scrape that and turn it into an Excel if it's a PDF?
If it's embedded into the website, you can. If not, there are several like PDF tools that will easily do that. Tabula is the one I have on my computer and use the most. If you're an IRE member, you get a free premium account to Comment Docs, which basically will take any PDF, whether it's a spreadsheet, a Word document, or a chart, and it will read it and un-PDF that document for you, which will save you the time of trying to retype that out.
Mark, to see that there's another question in chat. Can you see that?
Let me see. I cannot see the chat.
Okay, well, I'll just read it to you. This is from Jenny Schlesinger at CNBC. Will this keep updating? If the website posts new entries, will they appear?
This is just for pulling in it doesn't automate. You would have to go back in and just change that 0 to a 1. Like if let's say you have a web page and they bring in a new chart or a new table onto it, you would just go to the bottom of your sheet, retype in that same formula, and instead of 0, you put 1, and it will bring in immediately that new information. So every time there's a change to that HTML code, Google Sheets will pick it up. So you just need to go in there and just update that number is all.
Okay. All right, other questions for right now? I have one question, Mark. You talk about import data, importing a CSV file. What would be the difference between downloading a CSV file and just pulling it into Excel versus importing it by scraping?
It would basically carry the same format that it is on the website over to Google Sheets. Like one of the things that I usually manually import a lot of stuff and end up having to clean it, like FEC data. If I download the FEC CSV and I bring it into Google Sheets, it is going to tell me that there are 45 different columns in this spreadsheet. And I'm going to have to manually go in and tell Google Sheets or Excel that this is a break, recognize these commas or these tabs as a space or break between certain things. So I have to go through and manually do everything, which sometimes I prefer doing just to make sure that Google Sheets or doesn't screw anything up for me, especially if it's a huge data set. But if you import the data just straight as a CSV file, it would try and recognize the same formatting and same spaces and the way it's broken up on that website. It'll do it for you in Google Sheets.
Okay. Now you're talking about Google Sheets here. Could you just give us a quick assessment of the strengths of and weaknesses of Google Sheets versus Excel?
So the strengths of Google Sheets is that it's collaborative. One of the things that like I'm working on now is building a database for a project that we're working on. And we have over like 3,000 reports and documents. And I don't want to read all 3,000 by myself. So we have colleagues, I have two colleagues, and we're sort of breaking it up, and we're reading what we're each like taking a section. And so as we read and we're filling out and building this database, we can all work into it at the same time. And some of these different formulas that you have for web scraping and things don't exist for Excel, because it's on your laptop and not particularly connected to the internet. So you can't use Excel for some of these scraping formulas. One of the problems with Google Sheets is that it doesn't hold much data. I think it holds up to 1 million rows. And while that sounds like a lot, when you get federal data sets, you get to 1 million rows pretty quickly. And one of the things that it will tell you, if you try and upload a data set that's too large, Google Sheets will basically tell you, we're not going to bring this in. Like the import will fail every single time. And it'll give you like an error message, and it'll just basically an error code that means not enough rows. And no matter how many rows you try and add, it'll eventually just like tap out and you can't do anything with it. So for like FEC data, if I'm looking at when I'm pulling that together, if the website tells me, okay, there are 2 million hits for what you're looking for, when I download that CSV, I will immediately bring it into Excel. If it's narrow enough to where it's 100 or 200,000, I'll bring it into Google Sheets.
Okay. Got a question here from Chance Swaim at the Wichita Eagle. What if the web page you're attempting to scrape requires a search before displaying the needed data? Is there a way to automate that process through Google Sheets or Python?
There's a way to do it through Python, but it depends on what type of search it is. Like if it's Pacer, for example, if you wanted to scrape like court files, the best you couldn't really scrape them because it's behind like a paid paywall. So there's something there that intentionally keeps you out. You can probably build a scraper that alerts you when there's a new filing, and sends you an email or something like that, but you won't be able to scrape like the actual database. Now there's some searches that I've encountered when I was a trainer at IRE, to where if I wanted to look at everything, if I typed in 2 asterisks or a 0 or just hit search, it would give me all the results. Anyway, like I wouldn't have to necessarily narrow it down. It would just give me all 56,000 hits there were. Then I can just scrape all of that in. So it mostly just is a case by case basis, I would say.
Okay. So other questions out there? I have another question. Are there websites that are doing things to make them unscrapable? You know, they don't want you to be able to scrape easily, and what are they doing, and are there workarounds?
If I remember correctly, there was actually a Supreme Court case surrounding web scraping that the federal government lost, that basically said like there was nothing wrong with web scraping. Like you can scrape whatever websites you want. The only thing they can do is try and put a paywall up similar to Pacer, but for most federal websites, there's nothing they can really do to keep you from scraping them. Like one example would be medical doctors' disciplinary records. The AJC did a big project on doctors and sex abuse. And what they ended up doing was they scraped medical board websites. Like if you go to a medical board website and you try to look up disciplinary records, it's really tough to find them. You'll be lucky if you'd be able to find anything. But you can look at the HTML code and actually find where they exist. And basically the way they did that project was they scraped the data out of that HTML and downloaded all the records that way. So even if you try and make it difficult, if you figure out a way to just read through the HTML and find where the document exists, you can pull them.
Johnny, were you on that project? We have Johnny Edwards from the AJC here.
Yes, I was on that team.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that was Jeff Ernthausen. He did a great job.
Question from Casey Frank at the Miami Herald. When you scrape someone's site, do they know they have been scraped? And do they know they've been scraped by you?
No.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I have a basic one. So when you cut and pasted, or when you went to the inspect, how did you know which, like of all the HTML, how do you know which line to pick out?
If you go on the website, and I can show this, if you go on the website and you right click in the table of chart, when you inspect it, it will automatically take you to that section of the HTML.
So you've been talking about doing this in Google Sheets. Are there other, and this is a great strategy, are there other good, free or fairly cheap web scraping programs? Just a few months ago, I was trying to figure out something, and I stumbled across something called ParseHub, and it was like one of a handful of web scraping tools or platforms I saw. Are there any of those out there that are relatively cheap that are helpful?
There are a few organizations who have, I guess, open source scrapers, like GitHubs. To basically, all you need to know is sort of a little HTML, and you can take code that they've already written and basically use it as a scraper for whatever you do. The GitHub community is pretty generous. So like if they build a scraper from scratch, they usually post it as a GitHub repo for you to download and use. And that's a lot of times if I want to look for a scraper and I wanted to get code for it, that's what I would do. And IRE, they actually have Cody Winchester, who's one of the trainers at IRE. He's sort of their like go-to Python guy. So depending on what it is, I mean, IRE could even, in some cases, build a scraper for you for free or to very low cost, depending on the website you're looking to scrape. And I guess it would vary from how much work he would have to do to scrape said website.
I want to ask everybody in the Zoom room here, how many of you have done any kind of basic web scraping? Just give me a physical show of hands. I'm just trying to get a sense. And so it looks like only a handful. I mean, I think it is something that they kind of train in, they kind of teach in, basic undergraduate journalism schools now. But I think I've always seen web scraping as one of those things that on one hand seems very simple because you can look on a website and see there's something that looks like a table, but actually executing it has always, seemed complicated. And if you get, one comma or one parentheses out of place, it doesn't work easily. So Mark, I mean, you do training on this. How, for the uninitiated reporter who might be intimidated by this, is it tough to learn how to do this, or is it something that every reasonably smart journalist out there, like our 25 fellows here, can learn how to do?
Oh, it's definitely pretty easy to do. Google, the nice thing about Google Sheets, if you're missing something or you mess up with the formula, it will spit out an error code that basically tells you what you're missing. It will basically say, it'll basically fail to run and fail to scrape. And then you can take the error code. I like to Google whatever error codes there are, and then it will immediately tell you like you're missing quotation marks on something. This is what this means. So it's pretty intuitive and really helpful in sort of walking you through to figure out what you're missing. and what you don't have.
Okay.
And Python, learning to scrape in Python, I mean, I don't think it's terribly hard. There's a lot. You don't have to learn a lot of Python to be able to do it. You just have to learn enough. And I think if that's like a route you want to go down, that's something that you could do.
Okay. So we have a question here in chat from Julie Smythe at the AP in Columbus. Can you recommend some good tools for setting up alerts, i.e. your favorite for pinging you with site updates?
If this, then that is probably what I use the most. I will basically set up to where I did something on police shootings once, and I was trying to work backwards, but I didn't want to miss anything while I was working and not paying attention, just sort of had tunnel vision. I didn't want to miss anything that happened in our state where there was a police shooting. So I wrote something that says, if there's a news article that says South Dakota and a cop shooting, send it to a Google Sheet for me. And so every time for the next several months that if there was a cop shooting in South Dakota, it would take that news article, it would send the link to that article into a Google spreadsheet, and I would get an alert in my email letting me know that they found something new. So then I would go in and I would read that and just double check that it wasn't, an update on a shooting I was already writing about. And then if it was new, then I would add that to the data that I was working with. So that's probably one of my favorite ones, because you have so much control and customization, and being able to link it to your Google Sheet as well as an email alert is always helpful.
I'm sorry, and the name of
Can
that
I
is?
just ask, as a follow-up, is it cumulative? Like, will it add the next article into the next line of the same sheet, or it's just an individual sheet?
It will take the same sheet and it will add it just to the next row. So every time something pops up, it'll be like row 1, row 2, or 3, and it'll just keep going until you turn it off. It's called if this, then that.
IfthisthenThat.com?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just calling it up right now. Okay. And is this, I'm just signing right, is this a free site, or is this?
It's free.
It's free. Okay. Okay. We'll get a link to that for everybody.
Yeah. And I think there's also a Google Chrome extension that'll connect straight to your G Suite for you to work with.
If you are, looking to do a web scraping project or exercise or task, and this is one of the things that's, for these data experts that you've been meeting this week, are second nature and often very simple, but there's a slight hurdle for us to kind of learn how to do them. So this is the kind of thing that if you come across a website, it's got a whole bunch of COVID loan data, it's not something that's in an easy Excel spreadsheet, and you can tell it's the table, you can tell it's the database, and you want to figure out how to get it into a database that's workable for you. This is the kind of thing that the data experts in the coming weeks will be able to help you with.
Yeah, and I have a tip sheet on just working with COVID data with some links from IRE on different, whether it's data that we have at the New York Times, the COVID tracker that Johns Hopkins has, and all the data that IRE has been, and all the charts and databases they have been working with different media outlets across the country building. They have primarily, I think I spoke with Charles, who deals with data. He's at 95% of the projects that he's done. He's scraped these websites with Google Sheets and has not had to use any other coding program other than the formula that I talked about today. So y'all make sure that you guys get this tip sheet as well on analyzing it and how we use Google Sheets. We have sort of here's the GitHub repo, but if you want the Google Sheets version, this is what you can do to get it as well. So we have just both versions depending on what your preference is.